They say the poorest people often carry the richest hearts. And sometimes it is the girl selling food by the roadside, not the one sitting in air-conditioned offices, who teaches the world what true dignity means. In a dusty corner of Lagos, under the weary shade of an old almond tree, sat a small wooden stall that looked more like a patchwork of forgotten planks than a proper shop. But it was here that Esther lived out her days, not just selling food, but serving quiet grace to anyone who came her way. She was only 24 years old, yet her eyes held the calm sorrow of someone who had seen too much too early. Esther had nothing to her name except a worn pair of slippers, a patched gown, and hands that smelled of smoke and pepper. She lived alone in a tiny one-room space behind her shop, a room so small that when she stretched her arms, her fingers could almost touch both walls. There was no light bulb to switch on, no running water to wash away the sweat of the day. And yet every morning long before the sun began to rise, Esther would wake, fetch water from a public tap, and begin to cook. Rice, beans, yam porridge. These were her weapons against hunger. Not just her own, but the hunger of anyone who came to her stall. And though the world gave her little, she gave freely. "Good afternoon, sir. You are welcome," she would say to each customer with a smile too generous for someone with so little. That smile was her rebellion against hardship, against pity, against the kind of despair that breaks people from the inside. She had no parents, no siblings. Her family had long gone carried away by sickness and poverty, but she had dreams. Not the loud, showy kind that are posted on Facebook, but quiet dreams of owning a better stall, maybe one with a fan and tiles on the floor. Dreams of one day eating without first counting coins. Her friend Mama Titi once asked her, "Why do you always smile, Esther, when you have nothing?" Esther, still scrubbing the wooden bench she served food on, replied, "Because crying will not put food in my pot." And in that single sentence, you hear the wisdom of generations of Nigerian women, the ones who raised children on N500 a week, who sent their sons to school while selling a car in the rain. Esther is not just a character. She is a reflection of the women we know, the girls we raise, the strength we often overlook. Her story does not begin with a miracle. It begins with endurance, with firewood, with one plate of rice at a time. And though the world walked past her shop without a glance, something greater had begun to watch. They called him mad. Some said he stank like a soaked rag left too long in the rain. Others laughed when his wheelchair creaked over the dusty stones. Creak, 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 like an old gate that no one cared to oil. His name was not known. His story was not asked. People walked past him like one walks past a broken tree, maybe once useful, now forgotten. But Esther saw him. She didn't see the rags or the flies. She didn't mind the crooked wheel on his rusted chair or the way his bandaged legs never moved. She saw a man tired, silent, alone. She called him Papa J. Every afternoon, just as the shadows from the big almond tree stretched long across her food stall, Papa J would appear. He never begged. He didn't stretch out his hand or mumble for coins. He simply rolled himself forward, hands trembling against the wheels, and parked quietly beside her stall. Children pointed. Market women covered their noses. One boy once yelled, "That man again, he smells like gutter water." But Esther, that girl with nothing, gave him everything. She had her attention, her respect, and most days her food. She didn't give leftovers. She didn't scrape the bottom of the pot like many would have done for a beggar. No, Esther scooped hot jollof rice, added meat if she had, and placed it gently before him like she was serving a guest in her mother's house. She smiled when she did it, not out of pity but from something deeper. Something older than Lagos traffic and richer than gold. She smiled because she knew that one day she too could be that man, and she hoped that if it ever happened, someone would see her too. One afternoon, Papa J looked weaker than usual. His eyes were dimmer. His hands shook like dry leaves in Harmattan wind. Esther had just one plate of food left. It was meant to be her dinner. She hadn't eaten all day. Her stomach growled, but her soul was louder. Without a word, she placed the plate in front of Papa J. "You're giving me your last meal again?" he asked, his voice like dried cassava, thin and cracked. "I can always cook again," she whispered. The people around saw it. They stared, some in confusion, others in quiet awe. But no one moved. No one said thank you on his behalf. Only Esther spoke kindness in action. This is not a story about charity. It is a story about recognition. Esther saw Papa J not as a beggar, but as a man worthy of dignity. She served him not because he asked, but because he didn't. That in itself was enough. And in a world where many only give when someone is watching, Esther gave when no one cared. That made all the difference. That perhaps is what the heavens took note of long before she knew her life was about to change. The morning felt different. The air was still thick with the smell of firewood and the lazy hum of Okada engines. But there was something else in absence. It sat in Esther's chest like a stone. She had woken up as always just before dawn, swept the ground in front of her stall, washed the cooking pots and lit the fire. The water boiled. The rice simmered. The onions made her eyes sting. Life on the surface continued. But beneath it all, something was missing. She looked down the road. Once, twice, again. But the familiar sound did not come. No creak, creak, creak of Papa J's wheelchair dragging across gravel. No tired eyes meeting hers with quiet gratitude. No whisper of, "I'm hungry." Just silence in the space beside her stall, empty like a chair no one dared sit in. By noon, her hands had begun to tremble. She asked the vegetable woman, Mama Titi, who laughed and waved her hand dismissively. "That one, maybe he rolled to another street. He doesn't have legs, but trouble has wings." Esther did not laugh. She asked two boys selling sachet water. They shook their heads. She asked the bike man parked under the tree. He spat and shrugged. "Old people vanish all the time," he said. "Maybe he's tired of sitting there. Or maybe he's gone." But Esther couldn't accept that. Not without knowing. Not without seeing. She sat beside her steaming pot of rice, staring at the spot where Papa J used to rest. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows changed. The noise of the city came and went like a tide. But her eyes stayed fixed. It was as though her body served food, but her spirit was frozen in that one empty place. 2 days passed. Then 3. No Papa J, no word, no clue. Only silence that felt louder with each hour. At night in her small room lit by the dull glow of a kerosene lamp, she held the metal plate he used last. It was clean, but it still felt warm with memory. She whispered, "Even when it rains, even when he's sick, he comes. So why now?" She opened the window. The wind blew in cold and restless, her eyes filled with water, not because she missed a customer, but because she feared the worst. For someone who had already lost everything, parents' home, comfort, the thought of losing someone else, even a silent old man in a broken wheelchair, was too much. It wasn't just worry that filled her now. It was dread, a knowing. Something had happened, something big, and it had stolen away the one person whose quiet presence had anchored her world. Sometimes the loudest grief is the one that has no name, no funeral, no goodbye. Just a plate of food waiting for someone who no longer comes. It was the 4th day. The street was as loud as ever, buses honking, traders shouting, the smell of roasted corn mixing with exhaust fumes. But for Esther, the world had gone quiet. The empty space beside her stall had become more than a space. It had become a question, a wound, a prayer unanswered. She was slicing onions when the black car came. It rolled up to her stall slowly, the way expensive things do, as if they own the road. The paint was so polished it mirrored the sky. A tall man stepped out. He wore a red cap, bright regal, the kind only worn by men who knew people would bow before them. His shoes were shined, his shirt was clean, his face unreadable. He did not greet her. He did not ask for food. He walked straight to her wooden table, handed her a brown envelope, and said only this, "Read it. Don't tell anyone." Then he turned, entered the car, and was gone like a gust of wind through dry leaves. Esther stood there holding the envelope with both hands. She looked left, then right. No one else seemed to notice. The woman roasting plantain across the road kept fanning her fire. The children nearby kept chasing each other barefoot. But for Esther, time had slowed. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of white paper, neatly folded. She unfolded it carefully as if the paper might break. "Come to Green Hill Hotel by 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." That was all. Her breath caught in her chest. Her eyes scanned the words again and again. Green Hill Hotel. She had never been to a hotel before, let alone one with a name like that. Most of her life had been spent between the pot, the fire, and the street. She didn't belong in places with chandeliers and polished floors. But something inside her stirred. Not fear, not excitement. A calling. At 3:30 p.m., Esther locked her stall. She turned the key slowly, whispering, "God, please go with me." She stopped a Kiki and climbed in. The brown envelope rested in her lap like a secret too heavy to carry. As they moved through the streets of Lagos, past the yellow buses, past the shouting conductors and women balancing basins of oranges on their heads, Esther felt like she was floating above her own life. When they reached the gate, her heart was pounding. The building was tall, too tall, the kind that looks like it does not welcome barefoot girls who cook with firewood. The gate was guarded by men in black suits and sunglasses. They asked who she had come to see. She showed them the note. They nodded. "Yes, madam, someone is waiting for you." And just like that, Esther crossed the threshold from smoke and scarcity into marble and mystery. From the girl who gave away her last plate of food into something much bigger than she could have imagined. The room was quiet, so quiet that Esther could hear her own breath echoing against the glass walls. When the door opened, she stepped inside cautiously, like someone entering a shrine. And then she saw him. There he was, sitting in a wheelchair, but not the one she knew. Not the broken chair with crooked wheels and dusty spokes. This one was polished, regal, expensive. And the man, his face was clean-shaven, his hair trimmed, his clothes pressed. His shirt had gold buttons that caught the light. Her voice cracked. "Papa J." The man smiled a slow, steady smile that held 1,000 truths. "Yes, Esther, it's me." She felt dizzy. Her knees weakened. This was not the beggar she had fed day after day. This was not the man with bandaged legs and a silent stare. This man looked powerful, rich, whole. He gestured for her to sit. She obeyed, though her hands trembled. "My name is not Papa J," he said. "My real name is Chief George." The name rang like a bell she had never heard but somehow recognized. Esther blinked. "A chief?" He nodded. "A billionaire," he added quietly. It was too much. The firewood smoke that still clung to her wrapper. The ache in her ankles from cooking all morning. The memory of serving him jollof rice only days ago. None of it made sense anymore. "Why? Why did you pretend?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chief George leaned forward, his eyes gentle. "Because I got tired of people helping only when they think someone is watching. I wanted to find someone who gives with no camera, no crowd, no motive." Esther looked away. Her eyes were wet. "You gave me food," he continued. "Not because I asked, but because I needed it. You treated me with dignity when others gave me disgust." He paused. "Every year I choose 10 people who show true kindness. I help them become millionaires not because they asked, but because the world needs more people like them." Esther was silent. Her heart was pounding. She had not planned for any of this. She had not even expected a thank you. She simply saw hunger and answered it. Then slowly Chief George did something she did not expect. He placed both hands on the arms of the wheelchair and stood up. Esther gasped. Her mouth fell open. You can walk." He nodded softly. "Yes, I always could." Her voice broke. "Then why pretend to be broken?" Chief George looked directly into her soul and said, "Because I wanted to see who would care for someone who looked like they had nothing to give back." And in that moment, Esther understood. The chair was never the test. She was. And she had passed not with riches, not with words, but with something rarer in this world, a heart that gives without asking why. The drive felt unreal. Lagos moved past the car windows in blurred fragments, hawkers balancing bread on trays, women in Ankara, walking with wide steps, keek horns, and the sharp scent of fried plantain. But Esther sat in silence, her fingers curled tightly around the hem of her wrapper. She was no longer sure if her feet were still on the ground or if she had been swept into someone else's dream. Beside her sat Chief George, no longer Papa J, no longer broken, but a man of wealth and power whose silence now held gravity, not helplessness. After 30 minutes, the road changed. The dust gave way to tarmac so clean it shimmered. The buildings here were different, glass-faced, freshly painted, proud. As the convoy of black SUVs slowed down and turned into a compound, Esther's breath caught in her throat. What she saw made her mouth part in wonder. Before her stood a magnificent building, tall, wide, and elegant. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was the kind of place rich men bring foreign guests to impress. The windows stretched from ceiling to floor. The walls were as white as church linen on a Sunday morning. The entrance was adorned with flowers so carefully arranged they looked like something out of a wedding magazine. And then she saw the signboard. Esther's Place, home of sweet meals. She blinked. Once. Twice. Her lips moved without sound. Mine, she whispered. Chief George nodded, handing her a bunch of keys. Yes. All yours. Go inside. Her hands trembled as she walked toward the doors. Each step felt like 1,000. Inside, she saw beauty-clean floors that reflected the ceiling lights like stars, golden trimmed tables, chairs soft as clouds. The air smelled like citrus and new beginnings. She turned to the kitchen and froze. Gas cookers lined the walls, spotless fridges hummed gently, and racks were filled with pots, pans, even uniforms with her name embroidered on the chest pocket. You did this for me, she asked, her voice cracked with disbelief. Chief George stepped beside her. Yes, he said. You fed me when you had nothing. Now I want to give you a place where even kings and queens will come to eat, where you will never suffer again. Esther dropped to her knees, her face buried in her hands. But this time she wasn't crying from hunger or grief or loneliness. These were tears of a woman who had been seen, recognized, rewarded. You don't have to say anything, he said softly. Your kindness already spoke. In that quiet golden kitchen, a woman who once cooked with firewood under a tree now stood on marble, surrounded by stainless steel and hope. But even as the walls glowed and her name gleamed from the signboard outside, Esther's heart remained unchanged. What she had given with nothing was being returned to her 100-fold, not just in naira or property, but in dignity. The kind of dignity that can't be bought but is always earned. They called her Madam Esther now. Her name was printed in gold on the office door upstairs. Her picture hung in the hallway, framed and smiling. The girl who once sold rice from a smoky roadside stall now ran a restaurant where men in suits bowed and whispered, "Good morning, Ma," where jazz music played softly in the background and the walls smelled of fresh flowers and wealth. But even in the middle of that marble floor, Esther still walked like someone used to dodging potholes. Even with the softest leather chairs and the finest curtains money could buy, she still checked if the kitchen had enough firewood out of habit. Except now there were no firewood stoves, only state-of-the-art gas burners, white-coated chefs, waiters in polished shoes. She no longer needed to stir the pots herself. She didn't take orders or serve food. Yet she came down every morning, walked through the kitchen, greeted the staff by name, and touched the aprons hanging neatly by the wall. They belonged to her now. But in her heart, she still belonged to the wooden stall under the almond tree. Success had found her, but it had not erased her memory. Because there are some kinds of poverty you don't forget no matter how much perfume you spray on your new dress. There are some kinds of hunger that stay in your bones. And Esther, for all her newfound comfort, remembered what it was like to go to bed with just boiled water in her belly. So she started a new thing. Not for the press, not for applause. She bought a white van. On the side it read, Esther's Food Love, Feeding the Hungry. Every Friday without fail, the van rolled out. It stopped under bridges, beside bus stops, at market corners where boys sold bananas by the dozen. Inside the van were trays, hot rice, clean spoons, sachet water. No questions asked, no registration forms. Just warm food and a warm voice. Esther would step out, still wearing her fine dress, but with her sleeves rolled up. She handed meals to children with dusty feet, to old men with tired eyes, to women who reminded her of the person she used to be. One of her workers asked once, "Madam, why do you still come along?" "You can send people." She smiled soft and slow. "Because kindness brought me here," she said, touching her chest. "So I must send kindness out again." And just like that, she returned to the street not as a beggar, not as a vendor, but as a giver, as a witness, as a woman who had risen, yet still stooped low enough to lift others. That was how Esther remained Esther. Not madam, not chief, not CEO. Just a woman whose heart stayed rooted even as her name touched the sky. They say that what you give away is never truly lost. That when your hands are open, heaven takes note, even if the world does not. Esther's story in the end is not just about luck. It is not about being discovered or being chosen. It is about the quiet power of choosing to do good even when no one is looking. In this country where survival often demands hardness, where kindness is mistaken for weakness, Esther chose a different way. She did not have connections. She had no uncle in government, no social media page to post her good deeds. All she had was a heart that knew how to see others, a soul that refused to turn away. She saw Papa J when others did not. When others wrinkled their noses, she extended her hand. When the world laughed, she cooked. And in that simple, consistent kindness, offered not for applause, not for gain, but for love, she planted a seed that bloomed in ways she never imagined. And maybe that is the lesson. That kindness, like a seed, does not always sprout where we plant it. It may sleep for a season, it may grow in silence. But one day when we least expect it, it breaks the ground and turns toward the sun. Esther's reward did not come in the way many expect. It was not instant. It was not loud. It came through someone broken, someone overlooked, a man who had wealth but hungered for truth. Chief George did not reward her because she helped a rich man. He rewarded her because she helped a poor one, believing he was nothing more. And that is what makes her kindness rare. So what then does this story teach us? It teaches that your kindness is your voice in the heavens. It teaches that you don't need plenty to give plenty, that one plate of rice can echo louder than 1,000 sermons. It teaches that even if you have only M500 in your purse, you can still make someone feel seen, valued, remembered. To the elder sitting on the veranda reading this, to the mother boiling yam for dinner, to the teacher who buys books with their own salary, this story is for you. It is a reminder that the goodness you give, though small, is never wasted. Esther's life changed, but it was not the gold on her wrist or the shine of her restaurant that made her great. It was her ability to keep giving even after receiving, to remain rooted even as she rose. And so we close her story where it began, not in marble halls or black SUVs, but on the roadside under a tree with one plate of food and one act of grace. Because sometimes it is that one quiet act, the one nobody sees, that rewrites the story of your life.